Here is an apple, and here's a banana. Pick one. Whichever one you picked, it was your decision completely. This is what we call free will. It's the idea that we are the sole authors of our destiny, that in the face of multiple choices, whatever decision we make is completely down to us. We have the power of free choice. But what if I told you that free will is a myth? That we were all just a group of atoms who will react to a particular stimulus in a way that can be predetermined. If you picked a banana at the beginning of the video and we go back in time, if free will truly exists, you should be able to change your mind and pick the apple instead. But what if I told you that if we go back in time under the exact same circumstances, you'll pick the banana again? What if I told you that I can actually tell which of these two options you're going to pick 300 milliseconds before you actually pick it, with 100% accuracy? In the 1980s, Benjamin Libet, a physiologist, used an EEG, an electroencephalogram, to show that you can read and tell that somebody is about to move, 300 milliseconds before they decide in their conscious mind to actually move. This means that before we decide that we want to move our bodies, it's already been decided for us in our subconscious, and we only think that we made the decision ourselves after it's already been made. In a similar study, participants were asked to press one of the two buttons while looking at a clock with a random sequence of letters on a screen. With the use of fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, they discovered that two of the participants' brain regions showed what button they would press 7 to 10 seconds before they consciously made that decision. The results of this research only proves one thing. A few seconds before you pick the banana or the apple, your brain makes that decision for you. It is after this decision has been made deep in your subconscious that your brain becomes aware of it, and we become convinced that we are in the process of making that decision. Because the brain is like the heart, we don't tell it what to do. It just does. So in reality, consciously making a decision, the experience we call free will, is actually an illusion. It's simply a visualization of events that the brain has already set in motion. It tells you what the brain has decided to do. For as long as society has existed, we've understood the role of surrounding influences on our decision making. With idioms like, "it takes a village to raise a child," and "you are the product of your environment," we understand that to a great extent, our upbringing, our parents, the society we grew up in, all of these influence our decision-making process. If someone is born religious, it's not crazy to think that they'll be religious throughout their lives. Taking it a step further, things like genetics also play a huge role in our choices. Charles Darwin, in the theory of evolution, brought forward the idea that if species do indeed evolve, then things like intelligence must be hereditary. Intelligence is a trait that helps us make better decisions, and while you can study hard to know more than the average person, for the most part, how intelligent you are is not entirely up to you. So, some people cannot make certain intelligent choices, not because they don't want to, but because their genes are limited. In that instance, would you say that the person has the freedom to make those intelligent choices? Because in reality, they do not. Their fates are predetermined by their genes. How can we all truly have the freedom to decide our fate when we're not dealt equal cards from the start? And it's not just the cards we're dealt, it's also the ability to play those cards. Some are simply born better bluffers than others. When you look at the concept of free will critically, the whole idea seems to crumble pretty quickly. In fact, researchers have come to the conclusion that believing in free will is like believing in religion. Neither of them agree with the laws of physics. Think about it. If free will truly exists, and if choice is not just a chemical process, then why can things like alcohol and antipsychotics completely change a person's behavior? Even worse, we've seen brain tumors turn people from pediatricians to pedophiles. Domenico Mattiello was once a respected pediatrician. For 30 years, he was loved by his patients and adored by their parents and everyone in the society. In a shocking turn of events, however, in 2012, he began facing trial after being accused of making pedophilic advances towards his female patients. Neuroscientific research showed that Mattiello had a 4-inch tumor growing at the base of his brain that changed his behavior. In 2002, a similar thing happened to an American schoolteacher. He suddenly started having pedophilic urges towards his stepdaughter and was arrested. Then it was discovered that he had an egg-sized tumor growing in the part of his brain that was supposed to be responsible for decision-making. After the tumor got removed, the man's pedophilic urges stopped completely, and he was able to return to his family. If free will exists, why can removing a tumor change a person's choice? Is it then possible that by altering brain chemistry or physical composition, we can completely change a person's beliefs, ideologies, and choices without the person being able to do anything about it? In more recent years, lawyers have started using MRI scans to help plead the case of their clients. With neuroscientific research proving that brain tumors and malfunction cause them to commit their crimes, it's difficult to argue against it. Because if they did not have the freedom to choose to do something else, then why would you give them the heaviest punishment for actions they could do nothing about? Brian Dugan was facing execution in the state of Illinois after he pleaded guilty to murdering a 10-year-old girl. However, MRI scans revealed that he had mental malfunctions that affected his decision-making process. His lawyers pleaded with the court to spare him the capital punishment because, in reality, can we really say that it was his fault? If malfunctions in his brain caused him to do what he did, then he didn't have the free will to make a better decision. While he was on death row, his case continued to get argued, and as a result, the state of Illinois abolished capital punishment. Some scientists who still want to cling on to the idea of free will argue that, while it's true that the subconscious makes decisions for the conscious, we still have the free will to shape the unconscious world. And on first glance, this makes a lot of sense. You can read a book and an idea gets into your subconscious. Then, in the face of a choice, the idea you've read floats back out of your subconscious, forming your conscious decision. However, there's a flaw in that idea. It's much like a paradox, because where then does the desire to change your subconscious by reading a book come from? Desire, much like choice, comes from the subconscious. So a conscious effort to shape your subconscious is actually a subconscious effort to change your subconscious. The biggest obstacle the idea of free will, or lack thereof, faces is morality. If morality is based on free will, and free will doesn't exist, then what happens to morality? What happens to every other man-made institution that has been designed around the idea of free will? When faced with questions like these, many people immediately fall into a trap of fatalism. Fatalism is the idea that we are completely powerless in the universe's game. People who think like this believe that since we are not completely in charge of our destiny, we're completely at its mercy. It's random and not up to us. Then they become a lot less happy and start slacking in their relationships. They stop trying to be good people or uphold any moral standards, and overall they start to have a lower sense of fulfillment in life. But we don't have to fall into that trap. The scientists who champion the idea of the absence of free will would rather explain it philosophically as determinism rather than fatalism. Determinism is the idea that all events are predetermined by existing causes, that everything that will happen can be explained through the clockwork laws of cause and effect. It doesn't mean that we're completely powerless and simply at the mercy of what's to come. It simply gives us a different way to look at everything that happens around us. According to the government of the United Kingdom, more than half the people in prison have a brain injury. Doesn't that tell a scary story? Understanding the true concept of free will help us realize that those people are no different from us. They're not worse humans, and many times, they're just there because of a combination of bad events that were totally out of their control. In the same way, with deterministic thinking, we would also show more humility when talking about our achievements because now we understand that we are simply a product of our past experiences. It helps us to have empathy for people who are not in a similar position as we are, and it helps us to reduce our sense of entitlement. If the people in higher positions in society do not attribute all their success to their personal efforts alone, they're more likely to do more for others. They're more likely to help and to give back to others, hoping they might be able to recreate the factors that help them succeed. If you're getting scared or confused right now, I totally get it. Even the scientists who have been studying this for decades have found it very disturbing. It's a difficult thing to wrap your head around because it goes against everything society is built around. Free will is the basis of our society. It's what determines who is right and who is wrong, who gets the praise and who deserves to be punished. It tells us that a man who killed another man deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison, and that someone who works hard deserves to live a good life. And that's the fear of spreading the absence of free will message. Many scientists believe that if enough people are aware of this idea, it could literally end society as we know it. Because why would someone else risk his life to save another person if after he's done it, people will only say, well, he didn't decide himself to do it, so he doesn't deserve any praise. The reality is, praise and punishment are two huge factors that help influence our decisions. So if we remove them from our society, we pave the way for fewer good deeds and much worse ones. It's a strange dilemma to be in. Because although the truth is that we do not have free will, believing that we do is actually a lot better for us. This is the concept of illusionism, that although free will is an illusion, it's one that we must keep up with, because faced with the choice between truth and good, it benefits the most of us to always choose good. So next time you see a homeless person down the street, don't just roll your eyes and judge the person. Understand that there are a multitude of factors, many of which they might not have been able to control that cause them to be where they are. Be humble about what you have and what you've achieved, because just a tiny less intelligence in your DNA, and you might not have made that one decision that changed your life. Know that you do not have free will, at least how you imagine it, and you're just lucky your mixture of atoms makes the right decisions. But immediately forget that. Forget everything I said for the past 10 minutes, and act like every decision is yours completely. Because only then will you be able to make the decisions that can truly change a life. Free will is an interesting topic. It's almost like it makes you question everything you do in your life. We all have things we like doing, but do we really like doing those things? Or is it just your brain convincing you that you do? It's kind of like your brain is a computer, and it's feeding you algorithms to make you do what it wants you to do. Regardless, much like reality itself, free will is an illusion that we've come to live with. To be alone forever. Some people's greatest fear. A table for one at a fancy restaurant, falling asleep in a cold bed, a quiet, empty house. With no one to share your wins and losses with, no one to witness your happiest moments or comfort you in your most difficult ones. It's that sinking feeling in your chest, imagining that you're unlovable and undesirable and fearing you might remain that way forever. If you're single, there's a high likelihood that you've felt this way before, and if you have, there's no reason to be ashamed of it. It's normal, or dare I say expected, that you'd feel this way in a world obsessed with romantic partnerships. These fears are echoed everywhere, in the movies we watch, the songs we listen to, and even in social and political discussions. One of the first insults you hear thrown around is, "You'll never find love thinking this way." Unfortunately, this is why many people enter and stay in relationships that might not be the best, because we have this notion that being with anyone is better than being alone. But what if we could change our thinking about being single and focus more on the positive aspects of it? Here is why you should stay single. Embracing life without a romantic partner isn't easy, but if you do the work and are honest and intentional with yourself, you can create a great life for yourself. You can find happiness on your own, and for many of us, it's easier than finding the right partner. The first thing to remember is that being single isn't the same as being alone or lonely. You can be romantically single and still have fulfilling relationships with family and friends. Sharing your life with the people you love doesn't necessarily have to involve romance. There's this unspoken expectation that our romantic partners have to be our everything. They need to be our best friends, counselors, caregivers, and providers. These necessary roles can easily be filled by multiple people in our lives. You could even argue that spreading your support network across multiple people is better. It's unrealistic to think that one person can fulfill your every need and desire. In fact, this is one of the reasons a lot of relationships end. One party feels so burdened by all the emotional weight in the relationship that they burn out. By learning to share these roles and expanding your support network, you're better prepared for the difficulties in life. You're also less likely to feel lonely because you have more people to lean on. Even if your relationship with one person is suffering, you have others to turn to. This is why so many people are lonely, even people in relationships. Because they put all of their expectations on one person, they start to feel alienated and alone when those expectations are not being met. This dynamic of being alone with a partner can cut deeper than the loneliness you feel when you're single. Because in a partnership, you're not supposed to feel lonely. So adding to your loneliness is the shame and the guilt of feeling lonely in the first place. It's also difficult to share this feeling with others. Friends and family might have difficulty believing you because they see the snippets of life with your partner. So they remind you of the good times and tell you that all relationships require hard work, because it's commonly believed that being lonely together is better than being alone. Many people stay in relationships that they should leave because they're afraid of being single. And if more people had a positive view of single life, I think the pressure to stay in unhappy relationships would decrease. Being in a relationship doesn't mean you'll become your best self, but this still seems to be the way of life we're pressured to conform to. Romance is the central theme of countless Hollywood blockbusters, novels, and TV shows, We're constantly being sold the idea that love will complete us, that we're nothing on our own. We're taught to look for our better half as if we can't be whole on our own. Even apart from the stories sold to us by the media, society also seems to favor people who are in couples. Practically, life is just so much cheaper when you have someone to split the rent and groceries with. Healthcare plans and travel expenses privilege couples, and setting money aside, a spouse or a common law partner holds a certain status in your life, like an extension of yourself. Your partner holds the title of someone who knows you better than anyone else, even if you have a friend or family member who might be worthy of that role. Friends and family might see your life as incomplete without a special someone. Everything could be going right for you, but without a partner, you might be pitied and seen as a failure. The people in your life could be trying to influence you to find someone, making you feel that being alone is an inferior option. And after a while, you believe it's what you should do. But it doesn't have to be this way. There are lots of ways to live a happy life, and it's important to know what it feels like to live a happy life on your own. While it is true that the world isn't set up to support single people, there are huge benefits to spending life on your own. When you're single, you have complete control over your life choices. You want to move to a new city or change careers? You can fully pivot the direction of your life without having to consider the needs or wants of a partner. You can take risks without fear that your choices will negatively impact someone else. You don't have to feel guilty about going after what you truly want because ultimately, the only person you have to consider is yourself. It extends to little things like decorating your house, what time you want to wake up in the morning, and what you eat for dinner. While these sound like small luxuries, this kind of freedom and independence doesn't come easy with a partner, even with active communication. When you're single, everything in your life is entirely in your control, and this might sound daunting. Some people prefer being told what to do. It's why a lot of people are stuck in codependent relationships that they can't get out of. But being single forces you to work through any of the issues of dependency you might have. The control you gain over your life allows you to develop a sense of self and to figure out who you really are and what you want out of life. As an adult, singleness is the first time you get this opportunity. As a child, choices were made for you, and as a young adult, the school system controls most of your waking hours. If you're ushered straight from that phase into a series of relationships, you'll never really know what it feels like to live life uninfluenced. While some might be fine with this, I think it can stunt your growth. As an independent adult, you have the chance to get to know who you are when no one's watching, and you gain trust in your ability to make the right choices for yourself. Don't deny yourself the opportunity of self-discovery. An extended period of your life, free from any notion of romance, can help you tune into your emotional side. You learn what it feels like to listen to yourself without the distraction of outside noise that a partner often brings. You can hear what you want and follow through on your desires. When you become good at listening to yourself, you can begin to live a life that aligns with your own values. You learn how to soothe yourself in times of stress, take care of yourself, and enjoy your own company. And it sounds easy, right? Well, being single definitely also has its downsides. I don't want to paint a romanticized version of being single because that would be ironic. You see, even with the best friends and family, being single can still be lonely. Your friends and family have other people they're devoted to, and because you're not in a romantic relationship with them, they don't owe you first priority in their lives. You might want to vent to someone after a rough day at work and find that your friends are too busy and can't meet up. Managing chores and life tasks all on your own can be a challenge. Then there's the emotional and physical intimacy that most of us crave, even if only occasionally. Someone to buy you flowers or just make a cup of coffee for you in the morning. Also, in a partnership, it can be easy to blame your problems on another person. When you're single, there is no place to hide. You have to take responsibility for your life, the good and the bad. And if something is happening that's making you miserable, then you are the one who needs to change it. The difficulties of living alone can be so intense that they sometimes lead people to turn towards unsatisfactory relationships. Scrolling through dating apps trying to find the next first date, finding comfort in awkward situationships, or constantly seeking casual sex can all be coping mechanisms for starving off loneliness. Of course, finding yourself in strange, unfulfilling romantic entanglements isn't the end of the world, and each case is specific. But using other people to shield or distract ourselves from our insecurities and problems is easy. It helps us avoid looking deep within ourselves and investigating our dependent behavior. I think intentional singleness requires a lot of courage. It shows you're willing to plunge into the depths of yourself without fear of what you'll find. It can be seen as an act of self-love. You're willing to be your own company, spend time with yourself, and let your thoughts and actions guide the trajectory of your life. Your sense of worth, desirability, and validation has to come within. You can't fast-track this work through a month or two of being single between relationships. It might take years of singleness to realize that you're better off on your own, or prefer to be alone rather than with someone you don't like. You might even arrive at a place where you prefer to remain single forever, but this time it doesn't come with a sinking feeling of despair, but with excitement and a sense of liberation. If you're currently in a loving romantic relationships, don't take this as a reason to break up with them. Being in a relationship has its merits, and what you want from life is different for everyone. And I can't deny that dating can be fun, and every relationship you have is an opportunity to learn more about yourself, albeit through the lens of somebody else. Plus, you could fall in love and find the perfect partner that feels like they complete you and spend the rest of your life with them, because truly there is no template to this life. Remember that staying single for a while doesn't completely mean ignoring your desire for a relationship one day. Instead, it's an opportunity to find satisfaction despite that desire. It's about recognizing who you can be when you're alone and the type of person who could complement you. Who you are is special and worth protecting, and after a season of being alone, you'll more likely value yourself and your time. You'll know that it's only worth being in a relationship if it supports who you truly are, and if not, you'll have the confidence that you can remain alone. True compatibility is hard to find, and the mysteries of attraction are far too complex to dive into here, but after spending some time on your own, what if you do meet someone who adds to what you've built for yourself? They can acknowledge and love the person you've become when no one's watching. How can you deny yourself that? To be single doesn't mean you have to stay single forever if that isn't something you want. It's a chance to get to know yourself better, learn the value of your time and who you really are. It's about recognizing that you shouldn't just throw yourself at anyone for the sake of companionship, but it's also about not getting too tied up in yourself that you close yourself off from any real chance at love. Finding happiness on your own is important, but sharing happiness with another person could also be important. A saying goes, happiness held is the seed, happiness shared is the flower. Don't get so caught up in your single life that you find yourself clutching the seed in your fist with a death grip. When the right person comes along, open your hand and invite them into your world, and don't be afraid to spend some time in theirs too. If what you've built is stable, you can always return, and that confidence is what makes the best relationships. Only when you've spent time nurturing your seed of happiness will it be ready to bloom when someone comes along to water it. Love is a truly complex thing. So you're 11 years old. You've just scarfed down some mac and cheese and birthday cake. You and your friends run wildly, eager to jump in the pristine blue pool on a hot summer day. And then your mom stops you, saying, "No swimming yet, wait 30 minutes." She yells this from the other side of the patio. We've all heard it from our parents, friends, and maybe even teachers. Don't swim until 30 minutes after you've eaten. Resist the temptation. But why? There's this long-held belief that when blood moves to our digestive tract to help us process food, it diverts it away from other parts of our bodies, like our arms and our legs, which we need to stay afloat while swimming. If we don't have enough energy running through our limbs to keep us moving, we might drown. Yes, our body needs increased blood flow for digestion, but not so much that it interferes with keeping our limbs functioning properly. From the moment we eat food until it leaves our stomach and moves further along in the digestion process, it takes about 4 hours. During those 4 hours, some of the energy and oxygen that would remove lactic acid that builds up in our muscles divert to aiding digestion. But we still have more than enough for a successful swim. The worst that can happen? We might experience some stomach or muscle cramps, but we're not gonna drown. The drowning myth came from a 1911 pamphlet from the Boy Scouts of America that told young boys swimming right after eating would result in dangerous cramps. What started as a scare tactic has persisted for over a century. Good news for all the rambunctious kids out there, it's just not true. It's also not the only written in stone claim some of us have lived our lives by. Is the Great Wall of China visible from space? Can carrots help us see in the dark? Or what about cracking our knuckles or coffee stunting our growth? These myths are for the most part harmless to believe, while others have grown into conspiracies that might have larger implications. One of these is that big pharmaceutical companies are purposefully withholding a cure for cancer to protect their jobs. The conspiracy theory goes that big pharmaceutical companies will never find a cure for cancer because it would mean that they all go bankrupt. Some believe their fundraising cycle is self-sustaining, preferring ongoing funding over a cure. But that isn't the case. Cancer is a collection of related diseases, each with its own complexities. The theory downplays the reality that developing multiple cures for various cancers is incredibly complicated. It's not about withholding a cure, it's about the challenge. This conspiracy theory also overlooks the mind-blowing technologies currently being developed in the fight against cancer. The cancer research industry isn't one big lie. They are making real progress. But as you'll see in the rest of this video, sometimes a simple lie is easier to accept than a complicated truth. Believing that someone or something like the cancer research industry is out to get you certainly isn't an isolated incident. Since the 1950s, people have believed that adding fluoride to a public water source is a malicious act by the government and not a method to improve dental health. In the 1930s, scientists learned that fluoride, a naturally occurring element in water, could prevent tooth decay. This led to the idea of adding fluoride to public water supplies. Despite some initial backlash, studies in the 1940s and 50s found that any possible harm from the extra fluoride was unlikely. That still didn't stop theories from circulating. One in particular was popularized in the 1964 film Dr. Strangelove, in which the character General Ripper claims that water fluoridation is destroying humans and will make America susceptible to a communist takeover. Some of the anti-fluoridation movement seized on this theory, while others simply viewed it as medicine being forced on them. Now that narrative is still powerful. Some think that the addition of fluoride is backed by the sugar lobby to encourage people to eat more sweets without the worry of getting cavities. Cities all around the country are starting to remove fluoride from their drinking water in response to these largely baseless concerns. The American Academy of Pediatrics says that fluoride is a safe, inexpensive way to boost oral health in children, a fact that really hasn't changed since the beginning. The first city in the United States to add fluoride to its water was Grand Rapids, Michigan, in 1945. 11 years later, cavities among 30,000 school children dropped by 60%. The American Dental Association has called fluoridation the single most important public health measure to prevent cavities. Let's take a closer look at another reported risk to the human body and the debunked chemtrails conspiracy theory. You know those white streaks trailing behind jets? There's this widespread belief that they're chemicals purposely being sprayed for sinister reasons. Why? Well, some think it's some sort of mind control, others think it's a poison, and then some think that the government can somehow alter the weather with these chemtrails. But what are they actually? The white streams are called contrails. They appear when water vapor condenses and freezes around an airplane's exhaust, producing crystals. It's the same basic idea behind why you sometimes see your breath in colder temperatures. In low humidity, these crystals dissipate and disappear. In high humidity, they stick around and create visible vapor trails. This humidity difference explains why some aircraft have contrails and others don't. But how did this theory even come into existence? It probably started with a 1996 research paper from the US Air Force that outlined a future weather modification system to achieve military objectives using aerospace forces. Decades later, people have clung on. A 2017 study of 1,000 people found that about 10% of them believed the conspiracy completely, and almost 30% found it to be somewhat true. Then in 2021, a Facebook post claimed President Joe Biden manipulated weather through chemtrails and caused Texas's week-long deep freeze earlier that year. While the myth about chemtrails is untrue, its acceptance by the public isn't so far-fetched. Throughout the Cold War, over 750 mock chemical warfare attacks on the public were staged by the British government. These exposed hundreds of thousands of people to zinc cadmium sulfide in the process. The chemical was, at the time, thought to be non-toxic, but over the years scientists learned that with repeated exposure, it can be cancerous. In the 50s and 60s, the United States did the same, using the chemical to test for biological weapons. As much as conspiracy theorists on the internet might want to whip up the chemtrails theory, that's just not true. There's also the idea that the Great Wall of China is visible from space. With all of its sections combined, it spans over 13,000 miles and its scale is massive. It's also made from materials that can make it difficult to see from space. The human eye perceives contrast, and its color isn't that different from the ground around it. Some astronauts have reported that the Great Wall is visible from low orbit under very specific weather and lighting conditions. When the sun is low on the horizon, the wall casts shadows that make it possible to see it. But it's kind of a lie that so many of us like to believe. It all originated in 1932 with a Ripley's Believe It or Not cartoon that claimed the wall was the mightiest work of man, the only one that would be visible to the human eye from the moon. The wall's visibility from space became a particularly important point of pride for the people of China. However, when Yang Liwei, the country's first person in space, returned from his 2003 mission, he admitted that he did not see the Great Wall. This had such a widespread impact that China's Ministry of Education revised elementary school textbooks, which had previously claimed that the wall was visible. Another lie that gives us a sense of pride and possibility is the claim that humans only use 10% of our brains. It's one of those things you hear people say at dinner parties to try and sound smart. It's so fun to talk about that it's been the subject of various movies about people who unlock extraordinary mental abilities. What would happen if we were able to access the other 90%? In the 1996 movie Phenomenon, John Travolta gains the ability to predict earthquakes and learn foreign languages in minutes. In 2014's Lucy, Scarlett Johansson becomes a super skilled martial artist armed with telekinesis. In the 2011 movie Limitless, Bradley Cooper writes a novel and learns how to play the piano in less than a week. A 2013 Michael J. Fox Foundation study found that 65% of respondents agree that we only use 10% of our brains. And it makes sense. It's heartening to think that there's some possibility that we might become martial artists or prolific authors overnight with a little boost to our brain's processing power. The truth is that scientists don't ever think we achieve 100% brain function, but its 100 billion neurons are working at a significantly higher level than the 10% figure. If we only use 10%, most brain injuries would have no consequences, and we know that's not the case. And since natural selection discourages the development of useless structures in our bodies, it would have prioritized other parts of us over a head full of non-functioning tissue. The evidence isn't just theoretical. Imaging like PET and fMRI scans show the brain activity of doctors and scientists in real time. Large areas of the brain are used in all kinds of activities, from simple tasks like looking at pictures to more complex ones like solving math problems. Researchers have yet to find a part of the brain that doesn't do anything. It's hard to trace back to the origins, but it seems to have first appeared in the preface to Dale Carnegie's 1936 bestseller, How to Win Friends and Influence People, an early self-help book. Even back then, the idea that we've only harnessed 10% of our brain power made people believe in their own potential. Maybe you won't become a genius overnight, but it's not all bad news. We can still build brain power at any stage in life by doing challenging mental tasks. It's our nature to look for quick fixes, like turning on some dormant part of our brain to get ahead. Some of us probably thought that eating carrots would help us see in the dark when we were kids. It's true that beta-carotene, found in carrots, is very good for eye health. But that truth has been stretched into a vegetable that actually gives us superpowers. The idea started back in World War II as part of British propaganda, put in place as a safety measure. During the war's blitzkrieg attacks from Nazi Germany, the British government issued citywide blackouts, while the Royal Air Force repelled German fighter planes. The British planes could track the Germans thanks to the development of new radar technology, but the military couldn't make that knowledge public. Instead, the government claimed that carrots actually helped British pilots attack German planes in the dark. So why wouldn't the British public think that if they ate carrots, they would see better during the blackouts? Suddenly, there were ads telling citizens that carrots helped keep you healthy and help see, while blackout protocols were in place. And this launched an all-out carrot craze. So while the carrots might be good for your eyes, they won't give you night vision. Then there are all the things we're told are bad for us, like coffee, which apparently stunts our growth. Thankfully, studies have shown that coffee is linked to just about everything, and that there's no evidence to show that it'll stop us from growing. Caffeine is an appetite suppressant, so we might not eat as much, but that doesn't really impact our growth anyway. If you drink coffee while you're pregnant, it can occasionally result in a lighter baby, but that doesn't really have anything to do with coffee limiting growth once we're born. While coffee isn't going to stop kids from growing, it can present a whole other host of health issues as we get older, like anxiety, an abnormal heart rate, bad sleep, headaches, and more. So even if your kid technically can still grow big and strong, you might want to tell them to skip the coffee anyway. What about being too close to our screens or monitors? Can it really cause eye damage? No. But it can cause eye strain that feels pretty terrible. With more devices than ever around our homes, schools, and offices, it's good to be aware of how our eyes feel when we look at them. You might notice your vision blurring if you're too close, or perhaps your eyes get itchy, achy, or tired. Screens aren't going to cause us any permanent damage, but it also doesn't mean we should sit wide-eyed 1 inch away from them. Similarly, you might be reprimanded for cracking your knuckles. A friend or parent might caution you that cracking your knuckles leads to arthritis. But just like sitting near those screens, you're not doing any permanent damage by cracking them. The pop we hear in a cracked knuckle is the bubbles bursting in the synovial fluid that lubricates our joints. It's gross, but it's not bad for you. In fact, crackers have the same rate of arthritis as non-crackers. The real question to ask yourself if you like to crack your knuckles isn't whether you'll get arthritis, but why you can crack them in the first place. For some people, cracking knuckles can relieve stress or anxiety and might even be a type of coping mechanism for a larger mental health struggle. Some of us live in our brains daily with lies like this.
We blindly believe myths that originated decades, if not centuries ago, because they're easy to buy into. And often it's simpler to accept something as the truth instead of questioning why it might not be. If we can learn anything from debunking these types of lies, big and small, it's that we should learn to be more critical of the claims that come our way. Something might enter our heads when we're young and sit there for us to pass on to the next generation. Some of these claims might not negatively affect our lives, but some of them might lead us down dangerously untruthful paths. Life at its best is a constant quest for truth, even if that truth can be hard to find.
Have you ever had a dream that came true the next day? Have you ever had a vision of the future and then watched it play out in the real world? Have you ever had a feeling that something big was going to happen, and then it does? You are not alone. One night, the famous American writer Mark Twain awoke from a horrible dream. Mark saw his younger brother Henry laying in a metal casket, dead. On his brother's chest was a bouquet of white roses with a single red rose at the center. When Mark woke up, he was stricken with a sense of grief, as if his brother were really dead. But he wasn't. Henry was still alive. Still, his nightmare was so specific that it left Mark with a sensation of being more of a vision than a dream. The white roses with a single red rose at the center and the coffin being metal and not wood was particularly strange. At the time, wooden coffins were the standard. Mark was eventually able to calm himself down, and he dismissed this vision as only a dream. In the real world, Mark and Henry got a job working together aboard a river boat, but Mark was soon transferred to another vessel after he got in a fight with the boat's captain. So the two brothers were separated. Mark went one way and Henry went another. A few weeks after his dream, Mark got word that his brother Henry was dead, killed in an explosion aboard the riverboat. Mark was summoned to where his brother's body was being prepared. When Mark entered the room, he was horrified to see the scene from his dream exactly as he dreamt it. Henry was lying in a metal casket. As shocking as this was to see, a small detail was missing. There were no flowers, no bouquet of white roses with a red rose at the center. The nightmare must have been just a coincidence, right? Here's the twist. Before Mark leaves his brother, a woman carrying a bouquet of white roses with a red rose at the center enters the room. Mark Twain dreams of his brother's untimely death and gets every detail of his siblings' demise correct, right down to the color of the flowers and the unique type of casket. But he isn't the only luminary from the past to dream about the future. Abraham Lincoln reportedly dreamed of his impending assassination. There are records of passengers meant to board the infamous Titanic who dreamed of the catastrophe before it occurred. As a result, they didn't take the trip. These are only a few of the thousands of reported cases from all over the world of people dreaming up accurate visions of the future. This phenomenon is known as precognitive dreams. But how is this possible? Is it all just coincidence? I can't claim to believe in precognitive dreams one way or the other, but a story sent to me got me interested in the topic. It's a story I will share with you at the end of this video. A story you may find hard to believe, but first, I'd like to provide a little background and context that got me thinking that the story isn't so hard to believe after all. But what is precognitive dreaming? A study by the American Psychological Association defines a precognitive dream as a dream that seemingly includes knowledge about the future that cannot be inferred by some prior knowledge. In other words, they have a vision of the future that does not draw on input from the five senses, memory, or logic. Have you experienced something like this before? It's likely that you have, and given the nature of dreams and the uncanny feeling they leave you with, chances are you remember them. Although precognitive dreams are categorized as paranormal, research suggests that they are quite common. Up to 38% of large samples of people reported having at least one precognitive dream. Women report having them more than men, and the frequency of them occurring seems to decline with age. In 1989, a meta-analysis published by paranormal investigators Charles Honorton and Diane C. Ferrari cited over 2 million trials conducted between 1935 and 1987 on 50,000 random participants. The goal was to discover if precognitive dreams are more than just coincidence. And the results are shocking. the study concluded that there was only a 0.0975% chance that coincidence had anything to do with the descriptions of future events offered by the participants. But is the ability to have these precognitive dreams so unbelievable? What if they are more akin to something like instinct? And we don't debate the existence of instinct, right? Instinct almost always comes with a physical sensation. A study by Northwestern University investigated the hypothesis that human physiology can predict important future or emotional events. In this study, participants were shown pictures at random. On average, participants experienced physiological changes like sweating before they were shown a picture of a gun. But this is hardly a modern phenomenon. The Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest surviving works of literature that dates back to 2100 BC. In the story, dreams are regarded as visions of the future. Aristotle published a paper called On Prophesizing Dreams. In it, he concludes that precognitive dreams are possible, but that most of them are probably coincidental. Are precognitive dreams only mere coincidence? People can't really predict the future, can they? It depends on what you believe about time. When you're awake, does it feel like time is linear, moving forward, or is this an illusion? First, let's go with the assumption that it is linear. And if it is, then our ability to predict the future is impossible, right? The idea of knowing the future before it arrives is logically incoherent. Newtonian physics is built upon the concept of materialism. This is the assumption that matter is the basis of everything. So consciousness is merely a byproduct of physical processes. And this strictly physical world operates on the principle that time flows in one direction. This is known as the principle of causality. Thing A causes thing B, and thing B only happens because thing A caused it to happen. Your coffee mug shattered on the floor because you dropped it. Precognitive dreams violate the fundamental principle that an effect cannot occur before its cause. But this Newtonian materialist worldview has not been adopted by everyone. There's another theory, the theory that consciousness is a fundamental part of reality itself, and something so much more than a byproduct of brain activity. One of the most unbelievable theories in quantum physics is the theory that an observer can affect reality simply by the act of observing it. What's even more unbelievable is that this has been proven to be true. On the quantum level, it all comes down to qualia and quanta. Qualia is conscious awareness, and quanta is this discovery that objects observed at the quantum level are extremely sensitive to being observed. Nobody likes the feeling of being watched. This feeling often produces physiological changes in our bodies and results in us changing course or acting differently than we otherwise would have. And you've probably heard of teleportation, which on the quantum level really is possible. It's much like Schrodinger's cat, where the cat is simultaneously alive and dead. The cat exists in two different states at two different times simultaneously. You could think of precognitive dreams as the passing of information. And we know from our Wi-Fi signals that the passing of information can defy all kinds of laws, and what is being teleported in the quantum world is information, not matter. Newtonian physics and materialism simply cannot explain this phenomenon. But quantum physics can. Kind of. According to Einstein's theory of general relativity, time is just another dimension in space, and you can traverse this space in either direction, forward or backward. Quantum physics and general relativity supports the theory of a block universe, which is to say a four-dimensional universe. But existence as we experience it is only three-dimensional. You are a three-dimensional being living in a three-dimensional world. Physical objects in the three-dimensional world have height, width, and depth, and they take up space. Stay with me here because we're jumping from a three-dimensional world into a four-dimensional one. There is a four-dimensional space-time structure where time is just like space. Space and time both have coordinates, or addresses in space-time. Time does not have a tense as in past, present, and future, so all points in time are equally real. The past and future are no less real than the present. They are all occurring simultaneously. Like physical objects in the 3D world, time takes up space. This challenges the notion that the past already happened and so is gone forever. And the future doesn't exist yet, so it's inaccessible. This leads to the many worlds, or multiverse, theory. This theory states that at each moment, a new possible future splits off into a whole new timeline. This would explain how particles can exist in the same place at the same time. But this theory hasn't yet been proven. It can't be empirically tested because we just don't have access to those other timelines. Or do we? A common vision or warning in precognitive dreams is that of car crashes. The dreamer witnesses their own death while being behind the wheel, and as a consequence, they refuse to drive to work the next day or take a different route than normal. In effect, ending one timeline and splitting off into another. Another common warning is that of illness. In a study of warning dreams preceding the diagnosis of breast cancer, each participant had similar dreams that shared the same characteristics. Each dream had a sense of conviction about the importance of the dream. Each one was more vivid, real, or intense than ordinary dreams. Each one had an emotional sense of threat, menace, or dread. Warning dreams of breast cancer were often reported to be life-changing experiences that spurred the participants to get checked right away, which led to early diagnosis. Had the person not had the dream, the cancer could have gone undiagnosed, and for some, the timeline would end, perhaps prematurely. So what is it about sleep that allows us to do the impossible and break the linear flow of time? Is time both real and not real? What about the physical barriers of the world, both real and not real? This is a paradox, and that's the word I want you to keep in mind as we continue. Paradox. You've probably heard of REM sleep, but have you heard of paradoxical sleep? Paradoxical sleep is a part of the sleep cycle where the brain is incredibly active, but our body is unable to move. Brain scans indicate that the brainwave activity during this part of sleep is almost identical to brainwave activity while we're awake. For all intents and purposes, our brain thinks we are awake, and yet the body is, in effect, paralyzed. During this stage of sleep, the brain's limbic system is in overdrive. The limbic system contains the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the cingulate gyrus. These parts of the brain are responsible for our 5 senses and emotions, long-term memory, and muscle movement respectively. Though we're sleeping, our brain is still busy interpreting visual cues and sensations without external stimulus or input. So we are awake, but not awake. We are simultaneously experiencing the world, and yet we are not. Hence the paradox. This brain activity during sleep supports studies on the top-down connection between the unconscious mind and the physical body. The first empirical demonstration of this mind-matter interaction was achieved in the 1990s, when scientists concluded that guided imagery and self-hypnosis enhanced immune function. You could say that the simple act of behaving differently after having a dream is an example of your consciousness having a real, tangible consequence on the physical world. But how many dreams are ignored because they don't predict anything? There are nearly 8 billion people in the world. On average, the majority of them have multiple dreams each night. And when it comes to precognitive dreams, people aren't dreaming of alien invasions or zombies walking the earth. Though the content can be warning of something tragic, they are still mundane, possible, and plausible occurrences. If that many people are having that many dreams, doesn't it stand to reason that every now and then, a dream is just a really good guess or coincidence? I'd like to leave you with the story I spoke of earlier, and let you decide. The following story happened in Montreal, Canada in 2022. After yet another negative pregnancy test, Bill and Kate had all but given up trying to have a baby. They had the dog, and that would be enough. But one night, Bill had a dream. In it, he held their dog in his arms, but when he looked down at it, the dog had a baby's head with a furry body. Bill doesn't tell Kate about the dream, until the moment he has to. In the real world, Bill and Kate take the dog for its morning walk. Kate stops when she notices the dog has something in its mouth. Kate bends down to see what the dog has found. She holds the something up to Bill, and Bill's jaw drops. In her hand, Kate holds a tiny doll with a baby's head and a furry body. Bill tells Kate about his dream. The couple races home where Kate takes the pregnancy test. Then another. And then another. All 3 came back positive. Bill and Kate are going to have a baby. Maybe. just maybe, we really can see the future.
There's nothing worse than a sleepless night. We've all been there, tossing and turning. You focus all your mental power on trying to fall asleep. With all your will, you force yourself to shut your eyes, turn your brain off, and pray to be whisked away into sweet slumber. 10, 20, 30 minutes go by and you're still there, eyes closed, yet still unable to fall asleep. Despite counting sheep and doing a full head-to-toe, full-body relaxation, you're more awake than ever, staring up at the ceiling. So you cut your losses and decide to get up. You turn on the TV, do a crossword puzzle, or read a few chapters of a book. Your mind is occupied guessing the plot twist of your mystery novel or trying to come up with the capital of Nepal. Your eyelids grow heavy and your head bobs. Your book falls face down on your chest. The TV continues to drone on in the background. And suddenly you're fast asleep. This is the backwards law, which states that the more we try to pursue something, the less likely we will succeed. In the case of a restless night, the more you think about your desire to fall asleep, the less likely you are to fall asleep, and when your mind is elsewhere, not directly striving to achieve your intended goal, that is when you finally get some rest. And it's funny how this works because it seems paradoxical. Why do our wants come directly to us when we give up and let go? Alan Watts was an English-born pop philosopher who is widely attributed to the backwards law. But Watts didn't invent the phenomenon, neither was he the first to recognize it. In fact, he got the idea from Zen Buddhism. For Buddhists, desire and ignorance are at the heart of all worldly suffering. By eliminating this desire, you will no longer search for what you lack because you will be satisfied and at peace with your life. Watts molded the Zen Buddhist perspective into the backwards law. It's called backwards because it seems counterintuitive. In the West, we have a unique relationship with effort. Psychologist Mark Manson labels our ideas about effort as an example of linear thinking. Picture effort represented on the x-axis of a graph with the intended results on the y-axis. The more effort we put into a given task, say learning the guitar, the better our results will be. And for some things this is true. If you practice every day, at some point, although it might be far in the future, you could theoretically play Stairway to Heaven, widely regarded as the most challenging song to play on the guitar. In cases like these, the backwards law doesn't apply. It's not a magic trick that allows you to improve at a task that requires sustained effort and diligence to achieve results. This linear conception of effort and reward is etched into our brains. We usually only exert ourselves when there's a promised benefit. If your guitar experience is full of bleeding fingers and broken strings without marked progress, you will soon put the instrument down for good. The belief is that each time you practice you will improve is what pushes you through the pain and setbacks. The linear relationship between effort and reward motivates us to do complex tasks. And fundamentally, we believe our hard work deserves to be rewarded. It's not a flawed belief to have. It allows us to make goals, strive to achieve them, and feel proud when we reflect on how far we've come. The problem is that we've become so used to this effort equals result that we expect it in every area of our lives, even in situations where it's not applicable. This way of thinking is only valid when assessing quantifiable tasks. For example, the more time you spend making bracelets, the more you make. The more cardio you do, the more endurance you build up. Because these results are measurable, we can see a direct correlation between our hard work and the outcome. That's just not how life works. Often our best efforts do not yield the desired results. You can do all the right things in a relationship and your partner will still walk away. You can spend extra hours studying for a test and still fail. Sure, the effort might increase your chances of success, but you will be wrong to falsely interpret that as a guarantee. As much as we'd like them to, effort and success don't necessitate one another, especially regarding psychological matters. When you try and be happy, you only notice how miserable you are. Striving for freedom makes you feel more constrained, and yearning to love and be loved leaves you heartbroken and lonely. When a pursuit is strictly psychological, your effort has an inverse relationship with your wanted rewards. The more you try to achieve happiness, confidence, love, freedom, security, or any other psychological need, the further you are from that goal. And to make matters worse, there are no instructions for meeting those psychological needs. Centuries of philosophers have toiled and struggled to define the more ephemeral aspects of life, like freedom or happiness. What makes you assume you have the tools to achieve these elusive and mysterious parts of the human experience? When you apply a linear effort equals reward approach, You're bound to be disappointed because it's impossible to quantify the reward. How do you know the exact effort needed to achieve an unknown result? Moreover, your intense focus on your perceived deficiencies makes them seem more prevalent. The moment you start questioning your happiness is the moment you realize you're unhappy, and while self-reflecting, we tend to skew towards a negative bias of ourselves. Why? That would constitute a whole other video, but our negative self-conception, combined with the impossibility of achieving abstract states of being like love or happiness, mixed with a linear approach to effort and reward, is the ultimate recipe for misery. No wonder your search leads farther and farther away from your intended goal. You're trying to do what is supposed to lead to the ultimate happiness. You eat healthily, work out, set boundaries, volunteer, and spend time with family and friends, yet you remain discontent. There must be something wrong with you because all your efforts to be satisfied with your life leave you miserable. The constant confrontation of what you lack reminds you that you will never be happy despite your best efforts. You can lead yourself to a dark place when the expectations of your life don't align with reality. Backwards thinking tells us to stop trying to achieve what we want. It tells us to fight against the urge to control our emotional lives through constant tweaking and striving. The problem is that this goes against what we're taught by most self-help gurus today. We're told that we're in complete control of our happiness, in the driver's seat of our lives, and have total control over how we live it, and I've even said these things before. And so we try to micromanage our every impulse and desire. We try to exert complete control over our emotional well-being. We want to feel whole, but all our best efforts only leave us feeling empty. In the words of Mark Manson, desiring a positive experience is itself a negative experience. Accepting a negative experience is itself a positive experience. This might not seem very natural, but it is the truth. The counterintuitive nature of the backwards law philosophy prevents people from trying it. It's also possible that the theory could spiral in on itself until it becomes completely useless. In focusing on ridding yourself of any desire to be happy, that itself becomes a new desire. The desire to remove desire. But Alan Watts has a solution to mastering the backwards law. You must remember that you are at the root of all of your desires. You must recognize that you already have all you could want just by desiring it in the first place, so it's futile to attempt removing or supplanting your wants. Watts once said a knife doesn't cut itself, and fire doesn't burn itself, and a light doesn't illuminate itself. While this sounds obtuse and heady, it's pretty simple. Think about the person who strives for happiness. They pay close attention to the variables that make them feel content and enact those daily. From eating well to socializing and everything in between, they have built a life they enjoy. So why do they still question themselves? Aren't they just plain and simply happy? That is Alan's point. If you desire happiness and do what should bring you joy, then there is no need to question yourself. You are happy. Questioning or putting too much pressure on yourself to achieve an arbitrary ideal will only draw attention to a lack that might not even be there. Your actions reflect your desires, and in contemplating them, you will fulfill those desires. The problem occurs when you focus too much on trying because you will always fail, leaving you feeling discouraged. The goal is to just be. Stop trying to be confident, just be confident. Be happy, be secure. Asking yourself or others how to become or achieve what you want to be is a mistake. Let the question go, let the effort go, and just be. We spend too much of our short lives in a futile battle to satisfy what we lack. A consistent focus on lack can be crushing and obscure the abundance around us. The search for what we lack conceals us from what we already have. It's deeply ironic to spend your whole life seeking something that was in front of you all along. All you had to do was let go of the search and the desire, continue to live your life and stop looking for something you'll never find, and realize you already have it. To harness the power of the backwards law, live your life to the best of your ability. The backwards law doesn't work when you engage in self-destructive behavior. It's not about doing the opposite of what you want or thinking you don't deserve to live a fulfilling life. It's about living in a neutral state. To live this way, you are not regressing backwards to a place of self-pity and torment, nor are you reaching forwards to an ideal life you'll never grasp. You must honor that in your life, which makes you comfortable and content. Focus on your instincts, be yourself, and you must be present with what you have and not ask for more. It may be easier than it sounds. You could discover that you've been living life the way you've wanted, for yourself, all along. Because the primary key to the backwards law isn't the overthinking the state of your life, it's about continuing to live it regardless of its condition. You must relinquish control and realize you can never find freedom, happiness, and love through trying. So stop looking, because you've always had all you'll ever need. You were just too busy searching to realize. Every day you cross paths with countless strangers. People sit next to you on the bus, your cashier at the grocery store sends you a smile, and someone works out beside you at the gym. Often these faces pass us by. There's nothing particularly distinct or memorable about these people. We know nothing of their lives, wants, or desires. We might think of them so little that we fail to recognize them as people at all. Like NPCs in a game, we glance at them without much thought and move on with our lives. But when you stop to think about it, you realize how far away you are from others, how impossible it is to understand the interior lives of those around us. In a way, we live estranged and isolated, caught up in our thoughts and dramas. It's easy to recognize this feeling when we think about ourselves in relation to other people. You will never fully know even the people you've been around your entire life. Although you may want to, you can't jump inside their head. It's impossible to experience the world from any perspective except your own. But even with yourself, the person you're supposed to know best, don't you sometimes feel like a stranger in your own skin? You walk past a storefront window or see a picture of yourself taken by a friend and you think, is that really me? The way you looked in that moment contrasts how you see yourself in your head. While this is an uncanny experience, it's even more unsettling when it occurs on a deeper, more emotional level. Sometimes, your feelings, thoughts, or actions don't align with the person you think you are. Cue an existential crisis. You perform a professional and friendly role at work that lets you get the job done while staying on good terms with your coworkers, even when you want to be rude or lazy. Online, you show the best side of yourself and the worst side of yourself when incognito. Gourmet meals, vacations, and funny moments throughout your day paint a picture of a consistently happy, fulfilled life. In relationships with friends and romantic partners, you might hide your wants and desires to compromise for someone else. Or without even realizing it, you might change yourself completely to be loved by another. Too many people are going through life without any sense of who they truly are or what they want. And I don't blame them. So much of modern life is built upon hiding your true self while upholding false authenticity. This can go far enough that we even stop recognizing ourselves. We lose touch with who we really are. Moving through the world untethered from any true sense of self is bound to take its toll on your mental health. But living life according to your true self is challenging when you still need help to understand what you really want. So how do you break this cycle? To do that, you need to go on a journey of self-discovery. Although it'd be nice, I unfortunately can't offer you a neat list of tips and tricks to guide you to your true self. Instead, the journey to self-discovery is one you'll have to take on your own. Self-analysis looks different for everyone. The importance doesn't lie in how you do it, but in taking that first step. And that's what I can help you with. Self-discovery begins with listening and sometimes talking to yourself. You have to find a conversation style that works for you. And yes, I know this sounds silly, but for some, having full-blown out-loud conversations with themselves might be the best way to hone in on their feelings. Others might prefer journaling or writing letters to themselves. Meditation could also help. Don't feel pressured to stick to a method of self-reflection that doesn't feel right, because part of the journey is listening and following your intuition about how best to connect with yourself. Journaling could feel corny, or you might fidget through a meditation session. While it's important to give all the methods of checking in with yourself a fair shot, you've got to find something that works for you, or else you'll keep drifting further and further away from yourself. So you've carved out some alone time to reconnect with yourself. Suddenly your mind's racing with wide-ranging reflection questions that have complex answers. What do I like about myself? What are some negative and positive patterns in my behavior? What situations make me feel uncomfortable? Where and with whom do I feel safe and loved? Staring at the blank page, you're overwhelmed, and you may start to spiral. Your journey can and will be slow and measured. You won't discover your true self in one afternoon. Don't bite off more than you can chew when becoming acquainted with yourself. When you meet a new friend, you don't expect to get to know every nuance of their personality the first time you hang out, so you shouldn't really expect the same of yourself either. It takes time to get to know yourself, and it might not feel particularly grand or revelatory.
If you have big expectations of self-actualization, you're bound to be disappointed. Your true self is not a superhero bound to fix your problems. Being in touch with yourself helps you make better decisions and deal with stress or problems. Your true self won't make your life perfect, only more livable.
Did you know that while you're on this journey trying to figure out who you are, there are people who already know pretty much everything about you? These are data brokers. They buy your information from all the companies you visit on the web and use that to create a personalized profile of you, which they can then sell to companies that want to sell you targeted ads or even worse, scam you. A while ago, a good friend of mine got an email from Google letting him know that his information had just been exposed in a data breach from one of these data brokers. Soon after, he started getting robocalls, spams, and emails from scam companies who knew an uncomfortable amount of information about him, including his home address. Thankfully, with the sponsor of today's video, Aura, you can now safeguard yourself from these data brokers. Aura identifies data brokers that have your info and submits opt-out requests on your behalf. Brokers are legally required to remove your info if you ask them to, but they make it super hard to do, which is why Aura handles everything for you so you can spend your time focusing on other tasks with peace of mind. And that's not all. Aura does so much more to protect you and your family from online threats you can't see, with things like parental control to protect your kids online, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. All of this at one affordable price. To get started, go to aura.com/aperture or click on the link in the description to get a 2-week free trial. Once you see just how many data brokers have your information, you'll definitely recognize the amazing value that Aura offers. Back to our story.
Another painful part of the self-discovery journey happens when you hyper-focus on aspects of yourself you find unlikable. Feeling pain and self-loathing is normal, if not healthy. Much like a painful physical injury, it shows you the tender parts of yourself that need extra care and where you need to heal. You can see how much room you have to grow, but dwelling too much on your imperfections can cause self-pity and hatred, and these feelings can prevent an authentic journey towards self-discovery. You might start to avoid yourself by constantly filling the gaps and silences in your life, whether intentionally or not. Many people keep a packed calendar to avoid any downtime for self-reflection. Or you might keep a constant stream of music, audiobooks, or TV on in the background, so even while you do the dishes or fall asleep, you never have to be alone with your thoughts. On the other end of the spectrum, some people integrate self-discovery practices so seamlessly into their routines that they lose meaning. This could be a series of bland affirmations or standard guided meditations. Self-improvement is trendy right now, but keeping your journey uninfluenced is essential. Swiping your credit card isn't really a part of the wholesome journey within. Besides, it's important to remember that the self-improvement trend is mainly used as a means towards hyper-productivity. While checking in with yourself daily is important, I wonder how genuine this practice is when it's linked so closely to making money or getting things done. I don't know if it allows for true honesty, and you could be leading yourself towards a goal you might not truly even want. You might think you're on a path towards your true self when all you're doing is leading yourself further away from it. Part of self-discovery is trying to understand the stories you tell yourself about yourself and why those stories are so important. Are these stories even true? Are they useful? Navigating self-deception and delusion is part of the process, and when you begin to notice and understand how you trick yourself, your mind only develops more ways to deceive you. You are constantly trying to find yourself and hide from yourself. So it's more helpful to consider your process as self-exploration rather than discovery. You can then always have the possibility of finding something new. The journey is never complete. The self is never fully uncovered. Each exploration only reveals a new layer or facet that makes up who you are, because the search for one true self or true identity might be in vain. The idea that one cohesive self is at the core of who you are is complicated. For one, it begs the question whether or not you think people can change. Have you been the same person from childhood to now? If you think so, you may believe that your inner child is the core of who you are. But maybe you don't identify with who you used to be, and if that's the case, how are you supposed to find a self that has been true and constant throughout time? And how are you supposed to reconcile with parts of yourself that conflict with each other? And what about the role other people play? Our close family and friends see sides of us we tend to obscure from ourselves. They can offer us a unique perspective on ourselves that we can't get from a solo journey of self-discovery. Of course, we want to believe we're at our best around others. We may perform slightly differently based on who we're hanging out with. Through conversations and sharing observations, the people we trust most have the power to change how we understand our true selves, whether for better or worse. The person you think you are could be very different than the person the people around you report to know. Or ideally, the person you think you are could map onto how others see you. But either way, there is still a complicated question about which self is true. Is it the one I believe myself to be, or the person others know? Through talking with others and observing contradictions in your character, it's more satisfying to say the self contains many truths and identities. You aren't just one thing, you're gentle and kind in one minute, but you can also be vindictive and cruel. We are different people in different moments, and I fear any notion of one true, authentic self denies this complexity. Your true self contains a range of emotions and behaviors. It is your best, your worst, and everything in between. The problem is we crave consistency and cohesion in ourselves and others. You want to be able to summarize yourself in a nice, neat, concise story. But to do so denies so much more of who you are. To hold all the truths about yourself in your head at once might make you feel confused or afraid. You might feel the urge to suppress parts of yourself that don't align with what you wish to be true. But uncovering the true self means accepting what we don't like, which seems undesirable or conflicting. A yes and approach could help you reconcile with parts of yourself that seem in conflict. Yes, I'm generous, and I can also sometimes withhold love. Yes, I'm charismatic and can also come off as a know-it-all. Yes, I'm creative and I'm disorganized. Practicing the inverse of this technique, leading with your negative traits, is also helpful, especially if you're often mean to yourself. You have to respect and acknowledge the good inside you, and you can't give yourself the satisfaction of becoming self-aware without confronting your faults. Part of the journey towards self-discovery involves being confused by yourself. It's not about working through that confusion, but understanding that your true self is difficult to see clearly. You'll only ever witness truths about yourself in glimpses or fragments. You're a puzzle to yourself, and even in your old age, you'll never really be able to solve it. The journey involves snapping the pieces together anyway, so segments of the puzzle slowly start to reveal themselves. As a child, self-discovery happens rapidly. As a parent or guardian, it's rewarding to watch. Every day, children uncover new parts of who they are and become more sure of themselves. But that process never stops. You can also constantly surprise yourself. The difference in adulthood is that you become less aware of how yourself is changing under the surface. Your journey involves noticing how and when changes occur within you, and not relying too much on false ideas that you know yourself completely. Because we're always changing, and because our identity constantly morphs and reshapes itself, self-discovery never ends. It's a process. Besides, how boring would life be if you walked around knowing everything about yourself? You're the person you know best, yet you will always be getting to know yourself. A part of you will always be like a stranger you see at the mall or subway, but the stranger within is one to approach, get to know, and incorporate into the intricate network of your identity. Self-discovery, learning about who you are, is one of the many joys of being alive. To dedicate yourself to self-exploration is to know yourself the best you can. It's to empathize with, motivate, console, and cherish who you really are. It's to build trust, inner strength, and resilience in yourself. As cheesy as it sounds, to know and explore yourself is to love yourself. And at the end of the day, who can love you better than you?
If a tree falls down in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? How do you know? Taking it one step further, if you hear the tree hit the ground but don't see it, why do you trust your sense of hearing? This might seem like a ridiculous question, but the truth is that despite our total reliance on them, our senses deceive us all the time. You hear this audio and some of us hear Yanny while the others hear Laurel. You think you hear your friend laughing in the other room, only to come out and see it's just the TV. A stick that looks bent in the water turns out to be straight when you pull it out. You spend what seems like hours walking through a dark and creepy forest, but then wake up and realize you were just dreaming. The world is a strange place, and for all the knowledge we've managed to gather as a species, there's still a lot more that we don't. Here is everything we don't know, too. I think, therefore I am. You've likely heard this phrase before. Coined by 17th century French philosopher René Descartes, the simple declaration serves as the foundation of all modern philosophy. It's a statement of knowledge, an assertion that if I know nothing else, I at least know I exist. While this may not seem like a revolutionary idea at first glance, it's actually quite significant. Philosophers since the time of Socrates have wondered whether or not it's possible to know anything, because it always seems that the more questions we ask, the fewer answers we're left with. Descartes himself was renowned for his astonishing ability to doubt everything, no matter how trivial, no matter how seemingly obvious. He treated all of his ideas with a radical level of skepticism, believing that doing so would eventually lead him to the truth. This skepticism led him to ask a question that science still hasn't been able to answer. How do I know I'm not dreaming right now? Or, even more frightening, how do I know that my mind isn't being deliberately misled by some evil genius? Think of it like the movie The Matrix. It's possible that, at this very moment, you're hooked up to a giant machine that is feeding you all the sensory data you're currently experiencing. You aren't really watching this video, it's just the machine making you think that you are. While unlikely, technically it is possible, and there's no way we can disprove it. This is why some people argue that we live in a simulation. Do we or don't we? We just don't know. Descartes argues that our inability to rule out this scenario forces us to doubt everything we think we know, a state of radical skepticism in which we can't trust anything we experience or think. Fortunately, Descartes offers us a way out. Even if we are forced to doubt everything, the one thing we cannot doubt is the fact that we're doubting. If we can doubt, then we can think, and if we can think, then there must be a mind doing the thinking. So while we may never know whether or not the world around us is an illusion, or if we even have physical bodies, we can rest easy in the knowledge that we have minds, that we exist, right? Well, not so much. Later philosophers from Kierkegaard to Heidegger criticized Descartes' claim, arguing that the existence of thoughts does not necessarily imply the existence of a thinker. Friedrich Nietzsche even went so far as to say that the idea that there is something called thinking is itself an assumption. All we can really say then is that something is happening. What that thing is, we just don't know. If you're rolling your eyes at this point, it's understandable. To most people, this all sounds like a bunch of over-intellectualized nonsense with no bearing on the actual world. Even if we do live in the Matrix, I still know that 2 + 2 = 4, that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, and that the earth beneath my feet is solid. Well, hold up on the last point. Part of the reason why it's so difficult to say whether we truly know anything is because we live in a dynamic universe where nothing is ever stable. Everything in existence is always moving and always changing, including the Earth itself. Even as you watch this video, the very face of the planet is evolving. Plate tectonic theory is a relative newcomer to science. First pioneered in the 1960s, our understanding of how the Earth shifts and moves is still fairly limited. We've discovered certain things, like the fact that the Earth's rocky crust is in the form of plates that sits on top of a mantle of liquid magma. As this magma circulates and churns, it pushes the plates around, knocking them into each other and creating earthquakes, volcanoes, and mountains. What this means is that, contrary to what we think, the ground beneath our feet isn't solid. It's constantly changing, and if it is, how can we say we know it? Tomorrow, an earthquake could reshape our continents, and so the best we can ever have is a rough approximation of what we think it used to be, not what it actually is. Maybe I'm just trying to strong-arm a metaphor here, but it seems like whenever we investigate what we think we know, our ideas start to crumble. It's an interesting quirk of reality, really. The simpler a question is, the harder it can be to answer. It's for this reason that many people fear death, because we simply don't know anything about what happens after it. Yet I cannot help but think that the fear that we don't know anything about death presupposes that we know what life is, because in reality, we don't know either. While it's easy for us to tell the difference between living and non-living materials, say like an apple versus a rock, but when we try to pin down a precise definition of life, things get complicated. All life forms, whether a plant or animal, bacteria or fungus, are composed of cells and are able to meet certain basic fundamental conditions. These include responsiveness, metabolism, energy transformation, growth, and reproduction. For instance, when you smell food, you respond by feeling hungry. Eating a sandwich then starts your metabolic process, which allows you to convert calories into energy. This energy is then used to do things like grow muscles or attract a mate. But this is what life does, not what life is. The main problem is that the primary feature of life is that it's always changing, and definitions by their nature are meant to be static. Perhaps if we knew where life came from, we'd have a better sense of what exactly it is. Unfortunately, we don't know this either. Of course, one day science will figure this stuff out, the secrets to life, the earth, and everything else will be unlocked. All it takes is more advanced technology, more sophisticated methods, and we'll be able to know the answers for certain, won't we? Here's the thing though, science isn't ever 100% certain. When researchers at the European Organization for Nuclear Research, otherwise known as CERN, announced the discovery of the Higgs boson in 2012, they did so by stating that their observations had passed the crucial threshold of 5 sigma certainty. To most people, this term is nothing more than academic jargon, but sigma in this context is the statistical unit of measurement used to determine how probable it is that a given result is correct. The higher the value, the more likely a particular finding is true, with 5 sigma being the gold standard, representing a 1 in a million chance that a given observation is inaccurate. Though, there's still a chance. You may think I'm splitting hairs here. After all, 1 in a million is as good as true, isn't it? Well, no. A 2011 experiment conducted by CERN purportedly found that a series of nearly massless ghost particles, called neutrinos, had traveled faster than the speed of light. This was, of course, impossible, as the finding violated Einstein's principle of relativity, yet the experiment passed with a 6 sigma confidence, meaning that it had a staggering 1.5 billion chance of being false, and yet it was. 4 later experiments all failed to replicate the original results, and the first experiment was written up as a fluke. Science is very good at explaining what is happening and how it happens, but not really why it's happening. Pass any scientific revelation through a series of why questions, and you'll always get to a point where we just don't know. Take gravity, for instance. When an apple falls from a tree and hits Isaac Newton on his head, we know it's gravity. We can even measure it as 9.8 meters per second. But when it comes to explaining why this happens, almost 350 years later, we're still clueless. Every other physical force in the universe, electromagnetism, strong and weak nuclear force, has a corresponding subatomic particle. Yet we still don't know what the particle responsible for gravity is. Physicists have theorized the existence of something called a graviton that, similar to the Higgs boson, requires massive amounts of energy to detect. In fact, it's predicted that it would take a mass spectrometer the size of Jupiter, operating at 100% capacity, to identify one. But why is a graviton so hard to find? Why is it that physics behaves like this, and is it possible that it could work differently? The notion of alternate physics is most commonly associated with the multiverse theory, the idea that there isn't a single universe but an infinite array of different universes. We don't know if this is true, of course, but if it is, then it's possible that among these countless variations, there exists other types of physics. Maybe in another universe, gravity isn't so difficult to measure. Maybe instead, electromagnetism is the rogue force confounding their scientists. But it isn't just other universes that may operate under alternative sets of physical laws. Even our own universe may be subject to alternate forms of physics that we've yet to discover. In 2022, researchers at Columbia University programmed an AI to study video footage of different physical phenomena and then search for the minimal set of variables that described its observations. The footage included things like a pendulum, a lava lamp, and a fireplace. When the AI returned its results, the researchers found that they could identify some of the variables that the artificial intelligence had defined, but not others. The belief is that the AI was applying novel sets of physical laws currently unknown to humans. Unfortunately, since the program can't communicate what it's thinking, the exact variables remain a mystery. However, it does raise an interesting question. If we were to meet an alien species, is it possible that they might use alternate laws of physics? Ted Chiang's novella, Story of Your Life, the inspiration for the 2016 film Arrival, explores this idea. Fair warning, there's spoilers ahead. In the story, humans make first contact with aliens after dozens of spaceships suddenly appear in orbit, but rather than wanting to take over the planet, it seems that the extraterrestrial visitors just want to talk. To get the conversation going, both humans and the aliens work together to slowly decipher one another's language, as well as their respective approaches to physics. It quickly becomes apparent that the scientific and mathematical concepts that are advanced to us, like calculus, are elementary to them. Surprisingly though, the reverse is also true. The aliens deploy strange, seemingly convoluted methods to describe basic principles like velocity. While both methods provide accurate results, each is highly specific to the species that developed them. Eventually, it's explained that the aliens don't perceive our universe as causal. Instead, they witness all events as happening simultaneously. This accounts for their weird set of physics. Chang's story of your life raises interesting questions surrounding concepts like time, perception, free will, and subjectivity, forcing its readers to wonder if there's such a thing as objective reality. How do we know that the reality we experience is independent of our own consciousness? This problem has plagued philosophers since antiquity. Plato, in particular, is known for having proposed the idea of the realm of forms, a non-physical, immaterial plane from which the physical world manifests. Science actually functions on a similar principle, assuming that there is an objective reality that exists beyond our senses, which can be observed and measured. Despite our best efforts, though, no one has ever confirmed the existence of an objective reality. In fact, given that everything we know has to come first to us through our senses and therefore our own subjective perception, it's impossible to prove an objective reality. We'll just never know. In his book, The Spell of the Sensuous, philosopher David Abram argues that the very idea of an objective reality isn't representative of the universe we live in. In actuality, Abram says we exist in the realm of inner subjectivity, a term he borrows from the German philosopher Edmund Husserl. This form of reality, rather than being a separate and isolated phenomenon, is created by the collective experience of all its participants. The universe doesn't exist as an object of our subjective perceptions. Instead, it arises out of our very interaction with it. If this idea sounds a little out there, consider quantum mechanics, where our mere observations literally affect the state of matter. Just by measuring a photon of light, we're able to change it from a wave to a particle. So maybe there's no such thing as objective reality. Maybe all that exists is our collective intersubjective experience. There's simply no way of knowing. Plunging into the depths of uncertainty is never pleasant. That's why humans came up with reason and science in the first place. We want to feel as though we know things. It gives us a sense of control in an otherwise chaotic, unpredictable, and sometimes dangerous universe. For the majority of my life, I was agnostic about most things. If there wasn't what I deemed to be rational, scientific proof to support an idea, I just didn't believe it. But the more I learn, the more I realize how limited my own experience is, and just how much we as a species don't know. Ordinary matter accounts for just 5% of the entire universe. The rest of it, 95% of everything that exists, is a complete and total mystery. We just don't know. It seems naive, if not outright arrogant, to close myself off to new ideas just because they don't fit within my current understanding of how things work. Tomorrow, the Earth could shift, life as we know it could completely change, and everything that science has taught us could turn out to just be a fluke. But rather than meeting this dilemma with fear or outright rejection of scientific principles, we should take it as an opportunity to learn, embracing uncertainty as a means of transforming our perception. To me, this seems like the only rational path forward. Because as it turns out, everything we don't know is, well, everything.
Here is an apple, and here's a banana. Pick one. Whichever one you picked, it was your decision completely. This is what we call free will. It's the idea that we are the sole authors of our destiny, that in the face of multiple choices, whatever decision we make is completely down to us. We have the power of free choice. But what if I told you that free will is a myth? That we are all just a group of atoms who will react to a particular stimulus in a way that can be predetermined. If you picked a banana at the beginning of the video, and we go back in time, if free will truly exists, you should be able to change your mind and pick the apple instead. But what if I told you that if we go back in time under the exact same circumstances, you'll pick the banana again? What if I told you that I can actually tell which of these two options you're going to pick 300 milliseconds before you actually pick it, with 100% accuracy? In the 1980s, Benjamin Libet, a physiologist, used an EEG, an electroencephalogram, to show that you can read and tell that somebody is about to move, 300 milliseconds before they decide in their conscious mind to actually move. This means that before we decide that we want to move our bodies, it's already been decided for us in our subconscious, and we only think that we made the decision ourselves after it's already been made. In a similar study, participants were asked to press one of the two buttons while looking at a clock with a random sequence of letters on a screen. With the use of fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, they discovered that two of the participants' brain regions showed what button they would press 7 to 10 seconds before they consciously made that decision. The results of this research only proves one thing. A few seconds before you pick the banana or the apple, your brain makes that decision for you. It is after this decision has been made deep in your subconscious that your brain becomes aware of it, and we become convinced that we are in the process of making that decision. Because the brain is like the heart, we don't tell it what to do. It just does. So in reality, consciously making a decision, the experience we call free will, is actually an illusion. It's simply a visualization of events that the brain has already set in motion. It tells you what the brain has decided to do. For as long as society has existed, we've understood the role of surrounding influences on our decision making. With idioms like, "it takes a village to raise a child," and "you are the product of your environment," we understand that to a great extent, our upbringing, our parents, the society we grew up in, all of these influence our decision-making process. If someone is born religious, it's not crazy to think